Can you hear us?
Okay, can you hear us? Can you hear us now? Can you fix it?
I think you can hear us now, no? Because we set the microphone. We went to settings, and then this now, because this is the name of the microphone, X1.
Okay.
So we just reset this.
Play the sound. Well, we can hear. Right, save. Okay, can you hear us now?
Can you
hear us now? This is an exercise in
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
Yay!
Thank you, Hedwig. Thank you, Hedwig.
Thanks.
with
Loud and clear, Trevor. Thank you, thank you.
But then we have to repeat our thanks.
Okay, let's rewind.
rewind.
Rewind. Thank you. Again, this time with our languages. You probably didn't hear our names either, so a quick round of introductions. Guten Tag, I'm Katja.
Buongiorno, io sono Giovanna.
Kasia. Hi, grazie.
Dzień dobry, Elvira Grossman.
Thank you all for your interactions last week. We can't wait to get into your wonderful questions.
And can we just say that this is part of the team, quite a few people in the team, and you'll have seen also John coming in and out, helping us very much on the technical side. And we also want to thank a special person who's called Lauren Roberts, who doesn't appear, but who was very much instrumental in making this work. She was our admin person, and she's been absolutely wonderful. Okay.
Thank you very much. And let's go straight into your questions. We have here about 10 pages of your beautiful comments and questions. So we can't promise we can get through all of it, but we're trying our very best. Let's kick off with Mariam's wonderful reflections about art, poetry, and the migratory. And her question was really about kind of how art values multilingual. Miriam, yes, this is Miriam.
She's there.
Okay, so her wonderful question was really about how art values the multilingual experience, and can poetry actually be considered as an effective academic text and research, as opposed to more maybe factually oriented text. And I think a big yes to that. I was just going to throw in a quote by French philosopher Rancière, who says that the world needs to be fictionalized in order to be thought. And I think it's a good response to Miriam's great question, because sometimes we need poetry to step back from a sort of politics of exchange to a politics of fluidity, and poetry allows us to think between the lines and allows us to philosophize about meaning, and to debate meaning, and to and not to get too fixed too quickly. Whereas more straightforward definitions and clear-cut answers, might too quickly just fix us into one position, whereas poetry allows us to step back and negotiate. So yes, poetry in academic texts, big yes.
Did you want to talk a little bit also about Miriam's suggestion about the words that we use?
Yes,
because it was quite an interesting point that Miriam made, if you want to summarize it.
Definitely. So in relation to that, kind of Miriam, you raised a really interesting point about the sort of current language in media and policy around refugee, immigrants, and asylum seekers. And wouldn't it be better to use different terms, to prevent stigmatization, discrimination, and so on. And you suggested the term, should we not just call people guests, as a way to kind of emphasize the welcoming aspect of coming into a country, and this is a really good point. And we were debating this, and we were saying that Maybe it's not so much a question of exchanging terms for other terms, but about always kind of thinking about how the language functions in certain contexts. So, my example, for example, was in post-war Germany. You know, the invitation of Gastarbeiter, guest workers to Germany, and how in that context the guest, yes, was invited to work and to build, you know, build the country up and all that. But the guest was meant to leave because the guest never stays. A guest leaves and then people didn't leave, you know, and so the idea of the guest is not necessarily only a positive connotation, but in the German context, it's very much, you know, the guest worker who was meant to come to contribute, and you know, the labor was to be used, and then the guest was to leave again, and then they didn't, you know. So the term of the guest is again language always functions in context and in kind of political agendas and historical you know, foundations. So maybe we just need to problematize these terms rather to exchange them. So that's
but I think that Miriam's comment also reveals something very, very interesting, and that is a lack of language in our general rhetoric and the rhetoric that media applies when it comes to the so-called refugee and all the migration topics. So I think you've touched upon something absolutely crucial, that we still struggle, and you can see the struggle in daily articles, journalistic articles, that we cannot really find the proper term that has strong political connotations, positive connotations. It's to the contrary. The refugees are presented as problems, migration is presented as a problem, and obviously this colors the general perception. So the rhetoric of how the refugee topic is being discussed, the migration topic is being discussed, is absolutely crucial. So I think your comment points out to the importance of the rhetoric and the language that is being used. So again, it's just a very insightful comment. Thanks, Miriam.
And on to Chiharu's comment. Chiharu, you spoke about the Japanese context and the kind of need to for information that's pictorial, that doesn't just rely on 2 or 3 languages, but you kind of address the fear of many foreigners of tsunamis and earthquakes, and how you know, about sort of emergency language, like a quick way of conveying you know, language of rescue, how to get to safety, and so on. And Eduardo already answered your question, so you would suggest pictorial language as opposed to just kind of linguistic-based information and so on. And really, you already the question's already answered. We just kind of want to point to sort of maybe practical aspects of that. So, for example, in the UK, there are some refugee rights charities that have, for example, commissioned YouTube videos in the most common languages that are spoken by asylum seekers and refugees coming into the UK at the moment. So they're going away from written information to kind of very face-to-face, spoken oral language in social media, short YouTube videos and things like that. So just an additional to Eduardo's sort of idea of pictorial science. So yeah, YouTube videos, and I think there was another example.
Yeah. And hello to Stephanie, Hedwig, and Miriam, and Trevor, who are with us, and we hope that we see that more people are joining us all the time. So we want to move on to maybe the next sort of group of questions, which was to do with the political aspects of whether a language is considered a language or a dialect, and what happens when, what is behind the choice of speaking or writing in a dialect or a minority language as opposed to the majority language. And it was a question that I think was raised by Anastasia, but also Lisa touched upon this, and I think this also rings with a question that was asked later on by Janet, and the fact that the language that we choose to speak might be an act of rebellion. So I think, first of all, deciding which is a language and which is a dialect is a political act. There are criteria by which a language is just to be a language and not a dialect, or a dialect is decided to be a dialect and not a language. However, the criteria, like everything else, are man-made, are decided by people, and therefore the criteria we decide already have a political connotation. I personally come from a region in Italy where a minority language is spoken. It's called Furlan, or Friulian, I think, in English. This language is recognized as a language. Is the Declaration of Human Rights is also translated into Friulian. However, it's very much a language or a dialect that is disappearing, and fewer and fewer people are learning it. Something is being done now, a bit like here in Scotland in relation to Gaelic, to try and revitalize. But the reason why people choose to speak it and to write in it are obviously political, and as well as personal. Sometimes we want to make a point when we use one particular language, a minority language or a dialect. We want to make the point that it has as much value as the dominant language. And the filmmaker, poet, writer Pier Paolo Pasolini wrote in poems in Furlan, and it was very much a political choice, and it is a choice which it's part of also what, going back to last week, of verbal hygiene. Verbal hygiene can have a positive connotation, and the idea that you want to protect a language and you want to make sure it doesn't die out is also part of the reason why you might choose to write and to speak and to teach a language or a minority language. Yes, so this is for this question. Do you want to add anything else? Sorry.
Yes, no. I mean,
a conversation.
Exactly, and just continue some of the thoughts you said. I mean, the verbal hygiene obviously was the topic we discussed in the past, but I think there is also a very interesting aspect that comes with it, which has to do with self-censoring or the censorship in such, depending how we define and understand this. But some people also insist that verbal hygiene is just a more academic and more fancy name for political correctness. So we have to keep all these issues in mind when we think about verbal hygiene. But just going back to dialect and the language, because this is a very interesting issue, and some of the viewers asked us to define what dialect is, to define what language is, and we are actually in a position not to do this. So we would prefer rather for you to find out the definitions that are largely available and then decide for yourself, because it has to do with certain locality, it has to do with local politics, it has to do with certain political agendas within the area in which particular languages are spoken. So rather than discussing what is dialect and what is not, is I think that looking around the issue and look at the political aspect of various definitions and languages can be more productive for our own thinking regarding this topic. And perhaps one more point, since I'm now talking, Aidan has raised also a very interesting question as to which language people should learn and whether actually this course has touched upon this. And obviously we have absolutely no desire or even a need to tell people which languages they should or they should not study. But I think more of us takes a position of strong belief that language acquisition is really a dialogic cultural work, and this follows from some of the ideas expressed by Claire Cranch very clearly, who is a British scholar but works in the area of German studies. So I would say learning a language is really great for everybody, because it develops us emotionally, intellectually, and in all other respects as well. But there is also another issue that some of the participants raised, and that is the question of diversity when it comes to languages. And it seems to me that when we all talk about multilinguality, we do not talk about diversity for diversity's sake. But what we want to stress is what else comes with learning the foreign language or other foreign languages. And perhaps a question that was once raised by one of the participants on a different course, not on this particular course, and it relates to the point of diversity, is what good comes out of knowing 10 or more foreign languages if one has nothing to say, nothing interesting to say in any of them? Okay? So let's keep this question in mind as well, because the idea is really to look at linguistic diversity and appreciate really a plethora of issues that come with multilinguality. But we are in no position to insist that multilinguality is good and monolinguality is bad. We are far from it. I think there are complexities that come with both of these notions, and your comments very well reveal this. So we've been delighted to read them.
Katya, can you make sure that you scroll down? Can you just stop for a second? And Miriam was thanking us for the reply, and also adding something about the importance of our collective effort to color our language in a respectful way for everyone. And we can only agree with this. Bearing in mind that language never keeps still, and what is respectful today can acquire a different meaning down the line. And language and words are only what people make of them, I'm afraid, unfortunately. Unfortunately, or fortunately. Yes. Yes, there are more comments.
Yep, good question.
Although these are actually okay.
Yes.
Okay,
So
we can go back.
yeah.
Can you? Yeah. Is everyone now hearing us? Yes.
We have 8.
Yes, we've got people. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And do we want to move on to a different?
Yeah, I think on that note, I just want to mention Ella, mainly Ella's comments on sort of, the value of not understanding a language, the value of being, linguistically incompetent, and the value of, listening, especially when you're an introvert. And I think it very much relates to what Elvira just said, we might speak multilingually, but we might have nothing to say. And I think in an age where we're always forced to speak, we're always to assert our, position in the world, our value, our value as, people who can maybe make profit, I think the skills of listening and the skills of living with uncertainty are very much undervalued. And I think it's very much something that we were trying to push in this course, that, sometimes there's, in a world where everything is so politically transparent and consumable, it needs to be said that there is a value in not knowing and not understanding. Because if we know everything, then there's no need to communicate anymore. If we already understand everything, if we're already experts in everything, then there is no need for exchange. And then the exchange is just superficial. And, it's just an exchange of goods and capital, and it has no social value anymore. So yes, and yeah.
No, I mean, I think that the point that Katya has just raised has also something to do with I thought, very challenging, very critical, but also a very, very insightful comment made by Alistair. I don't think Alistair is joining us now, but one of the points that Alistair raised or expressed was that he felt very much as he was joining us through various weeks that the course lacks some kind of a strong focus on definitions, on clarity, on clear arguments. And I think what his comments revealed very much is this very strong desire that to a large extent we all share, the desire for clear-cut definitions, the desire for very clearly defined notions, for knowing whether we are in the right or whether we are in the wrong. And unfortunately, the bad news, Alistair, is that there isn't such a thing as when it comes to the topics we discuss, or even when it comes to very broadly understood humanities, because we are facing phenomena that are constantly changing, that are fluctuating, that are very much fluent, that are to use the Latin phrase, in statura stendi, is just happening in front of our eyes all the time. So we do not have sufficient distance, we do not have sufficient language, we do not have any historical knowledge or distance that would help us just to come up with this kind of definitions. But his comment also expresses a very, very human need that we all share. And this is why I very much appreciate this comment, because we really would like to have that kind of a clarity that you wish for, but it's very hard to achieve. There was also a minor comment, but I think quite important, in relation to the text on linguistic imperialism. And it was Alistair who kind of questioned the phrase which I used as I wrote the text. It's kind of a Reader's Digest of really the most important issues that are related to linguistic imperialism. But Alistair raised this issue and the question, quoting from the text, when I used the phrase, I am tempted to argue. And he left his comment with a question, what are we being told if the text has these kind of phrases? And I was really delighted to see that the answer to your question came from other viewer and other participant who quoted another part of the same text, the text that I wrote, giving an answer to your very question. And the answer really was that it is up to us, to a large extent, how we react towards a dominant language. So I would strongly encourage you to read Mohammed's comment at the end of this, towards the end of this exchange, where he quotes from the text and selects a slightly different phrase. But just one minor point when it comes to I am tempted to argue. The phrase actually, I thought, expresses our own vulnerability and also expresses the fact that we cannot accumulate a full knowledge of one particular topic. We can form our arguments and our opinions on the basis of what we have read, what we have experienced, but there is always something else. We are no longer in today's age and time in a position that we can say, yes, I have read everything about this particular topic, and therefore I could say that a particular definition can be formulated in this clear, reason-based way, because one argument then calls for another counter-argument. So the phrase was really just to indicate our own, my own vulnerability, and also how we construct our argument.
Okay, I think just a couple of little things also that were not just questions. Ella asked us to thank Tawona, and many of you were really taken by the Guide to the Traveller poetry video this week, and we will make sure that Tawona gets all the many compliments for all the many fans that were actually very, very happy. And we had a poet who inspired many of you with his words, but also some of you were actual real poets in your replies, and we were very much taken by the way in which some of you really used language in very much in creative ways to show your appreciation and to talk to us, and it was a real pleasure to read some of the comments that were really poetic.
Yes, indeed.
talking about appreciation also, we will make sure that your comments about the Gaza, the video that were done in Gaza, at the Islamic University of Gaza, we will make sure that all your very positive comments about human rights and social justice and education for social justice will get to Gaza. So thank you for that, because it would be really nice for them to read what people outside their prison, outside the street, so, and how they received what they have been doing there. So thank you for that. Yeah. You will mention this.
Okay.
So
Next.
can we move on? Yes, to the next point. I mean, one of the points that came up very much in our discussion, even before on this particular hangout, was the point raised by one of the participants, and unfortunately I have not noted the name, and again has to do with the language and the process of colonization. Why the colonizers' language stayed behind even after the colonizers left. And obviously it's not an easy task to uproot a language that has been imposed on a particular community or society for years. But there is also another aspect of a slightly larger dimension, and that is to say that the language of the colonizer, kind of dominant language, very often with the historical development turns on itself in a way that although at the beginning it becomes the language of the oppressor, is or the language of oppression, later on it changes its function and becomes the language of liberation. So colonized people use English and write in English in order to raise the awareness all over the world about their experiences and about the complexities that are involved in the experience of being colonized. So please do keep in mind, yes, that the language imposed does not stay fixed in this one particular role and in this one particular function that it begins with, but it changes its function and its role as time goes on. And really, it is very often used now as a tool of liberation, talking about the oppression rather than just a tool of oppression. So it's just this one point that I thought should be noted here.
And I think what links to that as well as Christina's comment, who kind of was asking the question, so should we call post-colonial literature really, should we call it post-colonial literature because it's still referring to events in the past, and should we not, value it for its own sake, or how does it make sense to use these words? And it's a really complicated question, and is it a hint to kind of raise awareness to a colonial past that needs to be thought of, that needs to problematize, that needs to be not continued, or is it a marketing, or does it become in many instances maybe a marketing tool for publishers because it's the genre of post-colonial literature? And there are interesting debates, for example, raised by writers from the African world, for example, and talking about how often their books, if you read Amazon reviews, it's really interesting because often so-called post-colonial literature is reviewed on the basis of its social value. So, because it's addressed certain issues, but it's rarely reviewed on its aesthetic value. So let's say if you read an Amazon review about Ernest Hemingway's stark writing aesthetic, it's almost a book. It's maybe writing that transcends social context and lives in the aesthetic realm. Whereas if you look at African literature, it's often reviewed on the basis of its social value, how it addresses social issues. And not to say that that is not relevant, but the question raised here is, when does a book transcend its issue-based character and transcend into the realm of being appreciated for its entertaining writing, for its prose, for its style, and so on? And is that also an expression of dominance to almost keep a certain genre in a sort of issue-based realm, whereas Western literature is allowed to transcend issue-based things and transcend into the more aesthetic realm. It's just a question that we can't really answer, but it's a good point to think about that positioning.
To mention not only in writers from Africa or like writing like English, but also in the Middle East, it's the same thing. Like, same thing happens often with Palestinian writers that have been addressed because they write about social justice and their Palestinian cause, but then the aesthetic elements in a way gets a bit dismissed, silenced. And in this regard, I was thinking not about a Palestinian writer, but I remember an Italian activist, Peppino Impastato, who was fighting against the mafia in the 70s. And he was a revolutionary and he was very famous for his social activism. But his, let's say, philosophical stand, it was everything starts with beauty. So when we will be able to rediscover beauty, then we can be able to fight for social justice. So there was a profound link between the aesthetics element and the fight and the activism, just connected.
Mm-hmm. And in a sense, I mean, this takes us to the very interesting point that I think it was Chiharu who made, but I am not sure just by looking at my notes, in relation to Leila Sebar's comment about colonial French Algeria. And the question was, wasn't actually the Arabic a language at some point that was a colonial language as well? And we found this question very interesting because obviously when you look back into history and when you look at different geographical locations, I think you could find a very persuasive case for arguing that yes, Arabic was or could be defined as a colonial language. But at the same time, another commentator referred to the Ottoman Empire. And I thought this is a very, very interesting point which connects with Arabic because the Turkish language of the Ottoman Empire used Arabic script up to the beginning of the 20th century. So it could be that people were under the impression that the Arabic script used for Turkish indicated the dominance of Arabic, but it was not really the Arabic. Then the Turkish language changed into the Roman script at the beginning of the 20th century. And even though Ottoman Empire was definitely a very strong center for Islam, but it was not Arabic language that came with the Ottoman Empire. So I thought perhaps we should clarify this just in case. But I think the comment and the question about the Arabic language also makes us all very much sensitive and very much aware of how geographical location influences various issues and historical perspectives. So the country that once became colonized then becomes a colonizer or the other way around. And I'm actually thinking about a very specific case of Poland, because there is this interesting shift of moving the post-colonial discourse into now post-communist discourse. And even though this has not featured in any of your comments, but the Central and Eastern European countries now very much also look at the scholarship devoted to post-colonialism and try to gain some insight regarding the post-communist condition. And it wasn't anybody else but Gayatri Chakravarti-Spivak who at some stage asked the question when she addressed Central and East European scholars, are you post-colonial? Yes, are you post-colonial? So there are these links between post-communist and post-colonial problematics. And Poland, speaking in terms of Central and Eastern Europe, is a very good example of the country who felt very much colonized by Soviet powers and also by other powers in the earlier centuries, but very often forget that Poland was a colonizer in relation to Ukraine, for example. So we have these very, very interesting elements, historical elements in various geographical locations. And I think the sensitivity that comes with comparative thinking can also contribute a lot to all the issues that you have been debating in the course.
Do we have any further questions here?
Utilizing terms such as post-colonial only reinforces the imperialistic notion of language domination.
And to a large extent it does, definitely. Yeah. But you see at the same time, it also points out, I mean, your comment also points out to this whole very broad notion of meta-languages. We can discuss certain phenomena in a language that already exists because we feel more comfortable, and it takes time before we can actually create a new linguistic tools that would free us from all the previous connotations and associations, as you point out. So yes, definitely, it does the same thing. We try to get away from it, but we are very much enslaved by the notions we have at our disposal.
I think there's another comment.
I think we've had them. No, that was. I think I've touched upon that already. Can I just, as we check for your questions, and please feel free to post any questions, and welcome to the people who've newly joined us. Okay, sorry, I stopped.
So grazie. So Miriam says, grazie, well done for fighting for Pino in passato. Language is such a crucial issue to disempower the imperialism of mafia and also terrorism before.
It is languages. We were discussing about that, about the imperialism and linguistic imperialism again. And we were discussing about how language is a tool for imposing power on people. And but as Elvira said before, how also language then becomes a tool to liberate from the oppression. So yes.
And we had some really good comments on sort of acts of linguistic defiance by so there are several great examples. This is Jessica. Jessica, you were talking about the portrayal of Native peoples in US films, and the fact that the sort of people were hired to play natives and do native speak, and how people use that situation to insult the American actors or the film directors, and went off script and didn't behave according to their assigned roles, that sort of defied that sort of position and used the language and the linguistic incompetence of the filmmakers to, as an act of resistance. So a really great comment.
There was another comment that we mentioned from Aspasia that was saying, I think that only if you allow a language to dominate you, it is then imperialistic. That was a very interesting comment. And
carry on.
And in her comments, she says she actually draws on the capabilities approach that was in week 3 on Sen and Nussbaum's view about how our soul, heart, and mind are ours to nurture and cultivate as we think best, regardless of exterior influences. And I would say that Sen and Nussbaum would agree with you on the side of the individual choices of nurturing the heart and mind and the capabilities. But I would also say that I would argue that anyway, the context, the exterior conditions, of course, shape your capabilities of choosing and your capabilities of then transforming your mind and soul into something else. So there are both elements that need to be taken into account.
Yes. And I think, did you touch upon Aspasia as well? Because I think
there was another one.
no, that she could. Again, there's this idea that we are in power of doing what we believe is right for ourselves, and the power of choosing which languages we speak, and the power of choosing which languages we teach to our children. And it's indeed, we all have the power to choose, but in order to have the power to choose, we have to have the awareness of what is being done to us by the imposition of particular standards, of particular languages. And that is not always the case. Many people interiorize the colonialization of their language or their spaces and don't realize that this is the case, and therefore think they're doing the best for the children, for example, in saying, okay, we'll speak English because our language is not as useful for your future, and so on. So in order to do this, you have to be aware about what is happening, and that is not a tool that is at disposal of everyone, which I think was really a good point that was raised.
So yeah, so we talked about how it is a social privilege to be able to choose in these situations, and how in an ideal world, you know, all these languages would sit peacefully next to each other, and we could all choose. But the reality is that there are structures of domination, how that are often visible, and that influence people on many levels.
And I think that was perhaps the main. If I sorry can be so arrogant as to try and summarize, but one of the main points that we wanted to make when building this this course, it was the trying to be aware and asking questions rather than finding answers. It was the keeping an eye out, critical eye out, and raising questions and not taking things for granted, not thinking that there is an absolute truth and an absolute list of to-dos out there. All the truth and the to-dos, someone has thought them, and we need to consider them critically and reflect. So it was very much about asking questions rather than giving answers.
Yes, and also raising certain awareness. I mean, precisely make all of us think about various aspects of multilinguality, monolinguality that do not come to us at the first reading or at the first encounter with other languages. Perhaps just on this very note, I mean, could I also stress very much the fact that my kind of side way observations regarding the course and the experience of this online teaching and learning is that I think this particular course has also proved very much the idea that the role of a teacher changes very much so in our age and time. The teacher is no longer somebody who can impart certain lessons or who accumulates certain knowledge and has the position of authority, but it becomes more of a moderator, it becomes more of a discussant, it becomes more of a person who engages with others, because obviously all the learners now have access to many data, to many historical facts, to all this very publicly available information. And I'm very often in lecture halls put in a position where students who listen to my lecture can access various sources which I did not access before, and they bring up all these counter arguments. And what is so wonderful about this course as well is that I have learned a lot from reading your comments, and I felt very much enriched by the debate that has been developing and going on. And I think that this kind of a mutual enrichment is something that we all very much appreciate, and we wanted to thank you profoundly.
We thought we give you a big
Thank you all very much for making our life very interesting and contributing so much to our intellectual and emotional development through your comments.
Thank you. Grazie.
We have to draw to a close, so big thank you. And just to let you know that there will be a rerun of this course in June. The exact dates will be available soon. But thank you everybody for participating, for enriching us over the last 3 weeks, and hopefully we will meet some of you again very soon.
Thank you.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Ciao.
Do widzenia.